The letter from the 6 former Australian Prime Ministers was strong and it was fair and it was compassionate. What is your take on former Prime Minister Paul Keating not joining in that letter?
He can explain himself to the Australian people, but I thought it was a very odd omission from him. It was great to see Malcolm Turnbull, Tony Abbott, 2 old rivals, pulling together in the national interest and for justice by condemning Hamas and expressing support for the Israeli people. I thought that was an excellent example, and it really does highlight Paul Keating's omission from that letter.
But isn't it the case also that the language in that letter was stronger and clearer, and it coming from 2 former Labor Prime Ministers in Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd? Kevin Rudd, currently Australia's ambassador in the US, yet their language was stronger and clearer than anything we've heard from the serving Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
You're absolutely right, Chris. The fact that former Prime Ministers from both sides of the aisle were able to overshadow Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong and Richard Marles is quite an achievement, I've got to say. And it just shows that Labor's instincts on this issue are all over the place. Anthony Albanese's been distracted. His instincts are weak on national security. Penny Wong's tied herself up in knots. Richard Marles has been pretty solid, but generally speaking, he's not exactly got great instincts on this either. And you've seen what's happened with the Labor cabinet over the last few weeks. Never mind what's happening domestically, not just in Australia, but across the West, with the moral equivalence and the nuance and the context. You remember what the UN Secretary General said, that this didn't happen in a vacuum. Which is just disgraceful.
Just disgusting. Look, I would differ in your assessment to one degree. I would say that Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese have been strong on foreign policy so far in the way they've stood up to China and in the way they've been strong on the US alliance through AUKUS. But yes, this has exposed a weakness. There's been a mealy-mouthed response from Anthony Albanese. Isn't there a clear template here for him? Shouldn't he be directed just to read that letter from the former Prime Ministers and understand that that is the right positioning for this country?
It's a pretty strong blueprint to follow. It's a pretty strong blueprint to follow for him. And he just has to follow the bouncing ball. There's a lot of collective wisdom from those Prime Ministers, and I think he should take that and run with it. It's a gift for a guy who is looking for an answer.
And why hasn't he spoken with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister?
That is a great question, Chris. Congressman Mike Johnson, who was elected Speaker last week, he was meant to appear here at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship in London. One of the first things he did was call Benjamin Netanyahu as the newly elected US Speaker. Very, very odd that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has not had that phone call yet.
Do you think that this is reticence on his part or on Benjamin Netanyahu's part?
I just think it demonstrates that this Labor government has dropped the ball on Israel. Israel is a very important friend and ally. It's a free people, a democracy in the Middle East, a villa in the jungle, as Ehud Barak said. And Anthony Albanese should have good communications with the Prime Minister. It's as simple as that.
Just in the context of the conference that you're at, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, where you're talking about some of these issues, I wonder if you could finally just reflect on a point I made at the top of this program, that the way we deal with this issue at the moment and the way it's leading to anti-Semitism around the world and some obscene responses from some leaders, isn't this more than a test of Israel and a test of Palestinian peoples? This is very much a test of our civilisation.
We are in a civilisational moment, and that's why the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship has gathered here in Greenwich. We are affirming the good things about Western civilisation. Truth, justice, ordered liberty under law. And right now in the West, we've seen terrible moral equivalency arguments made about Hamas and Israel. And so what we're gathering here to do is to reaffirm truth. And we find ourselves in a situation in the West where we can't even agree on a definition of what constitutes a man and a woman. And if we're that confused, how on earth can we do grand strategy and take on some of the strategic challenges of the day, including a rising China, Russia, and what's happening in the Middle East? So we need to get back to basics. That's what ARC is all about. It's about getting back to basics. And I've got to tell you, I've been surprised at how many people have turned up here. Really, really encouraging.
Great stuff.
It's a bit like the start of the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. There's boats all over the place, but once we're out past the heads with a wet sail, this thing will really take off and get moving over the coming years.
Great stuff. We'll catch up with some other guests there. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. I appreciate it. Andrew Hastie there making a great point that if we can't even work out what a man and a woman is, how are we going to solve the bigger issues?